I met Clara in college, where she was studying to become a nurse. She was ambitious and driven, qualities that attracted me. I was just starting my own marketing firm and had dreams of building something that would last. She told me she wanted stability, someone she could depend on while she pursued her career. We hit it off right away, and before long, I was head over heels. We married 6 years later, after we'd both found our footing in our careers. For a long time, I thought I had it all, someone to share the highs and lows, a partner I could count on. But years into our marriage, something shifted. At first, it was subtle. She started coming home later than usual, always with an excuse about last-minute work responsibilities or grabbing dinner with co-workers. I brushed it off. After all, I knew how hard she worked and how important her career was to her. But over time, her absences became more frequent, her stories more elaborate. One night, she mentioned needing to attend an out-of-town conference that hadn't come up until the last minute. I didn't question her, assuming she'd keep me in the loop if anything serious was going on. Months passed, and I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. Clara had always been transparent with me. We shared everything, from silly jokes to plans about our future. Yet here we were, avoiding each other at home, sidestepping conversations that once flowed easily. I tried to convince myself that this was just a rough patch, something all couples went through. But that Friday evening, everything I'd tried to ignore came crashing down. Clara casually informed me she'd be spending the night out. Meeting a friend, she said. Her voice was light, almost carefree, and she didn't meet my gaze. I wanted to ask questions, but I held back, not wanting to seem suspicious. Sure, I replied, forcing a smile. Have a good time. She grabbed her purse, gave a quick wave, and walked out. As soon as she left, the unease I'd been suppressing surged back. I couldn't shake it this time. I paced around the living room, glancing at the door as if hoping she'd come back, laughing, telling me it was all a joke. But deep down, I knew better. I grabbed my laptop, opening up our shared bank account on a whim. I told myself it was ridiculous, that I'd find nothing, but there it was, a charge from a luxury hotel across town, made that very afternoon. My stomach dropped as I realized what that meant. She hadn't planned to stay with a friend, she was meeting someone, and I was the last to know. My first instinct was to call her, confront her, demand answers. But as I sat there, staring at the screen, a new feeling replaced the shock, anger. I had given everything to this relationship. I'd supported her, been patient with her long hours, and believed in her dreams. And in return, she'd thrown our life together away. Suddenly, I knew I couldn't just confront her without a plan. This wasn't going to be a typical argument, and it certainly wasn't going to be another instance of me bending to make her happy. If she wanted a way out, I'd give her one, but on my terms. The next morning, she came back with a casual smile, as if nothing had happened. I greeted her calmly, hiding my knowledge and playing along, waiting for the right moment. She mentioned her friend and how much fun they'd had catching up, tossing off details with an ease that made my stomach churn. The facade was so convincing that, had I not known better, I might have believed her. But now, everything she said seemed tainted, as if every word was a performance. Throughout the following week, I quietly started making arrangements. I contacted my bank, closed out our joint accounts, and moved the money into a private account she couldn't access. I filed to have her removed from my business health insurance, and I reached out to my lawyer, securing paperwork to separate our assets. Each step was deliberate, a small piece of a larger plan to sever every tie she thought she could rely on. And with every action, my resentment grew, fueled by the thought of her betrayal and her utter confidence that I'd never discover it. As the days passed, she didn't seem to notice the subtle changes. She'd always had her own bank account, one she maintained just in case, so I doubted she'd even checked our joint funds. Each night, I'd come home to her smiling as though everything were normal, blissfully unaware that I was systematically dismantling the life we'd built together. It was almost laughable, watching her go about her day, planning dinners and acting like we were the same couple we'd been for years. Finally, the day arrived. She had another friend meeting scheduled, and I saw her pack a small overnight bag, her voice light and unconcerned as she announced she'd be staying out again. This time, I didn't bother to hide the anger in my voice as I responded. "Do whatever you need to," I said, my tone clipped. Her eyes flicked to me, a hint of surprise in her expression, but she brushed it off, leaving with her usual carefree attitude. As soon as she was out the door, I sprang into action. I changed the locks on the house and gathered the last of her belongings into a box, setting it neatly by the front door. I poured myself a drink, letting the bitterness melt into a strange, exhilarating satisfaction. This was it. When she came back, she'd find everything changed, the security of our shared life stripped away. She'd built a world of deception, but I was about to turn it upside down. In the stillness of the evening, I sat in the living room, sipping my drink and staring at the door, waiting for the inevitable. It felt like a strange kind of freedom, knowing that I'd finally broken free from her lies. And in that silence, a wave of calm washed over me. Whatever happened next, I knew I was ready. The morning sunlight was just beginning to filter through the blinds when I heard her frantic pounding on the door. I could picture her standing there, exhausted from her so-called night out, trying to figure out why her key wasn't working. I didn't move immediately, letting her knock for a few more minutes before I stood, taking my time to reach the door. I wanted her to feel every second of uncertainty, every bit of unease that had settled in me over the past few months. When I finally opened the door, Clara looked at me, bewildered and slightly irritated. Her hair was tousled, and there was a smugness in her expression, the kind you only find on someone who's never been caught. "Why's my key not working?" she asked, a forced laugh in her voice. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Because I changed the locks." Her smile faltered as she searched my face, realizing I wasn't joking. "What? Why would you do that?" My gaze didn't waver. "Come inside. We need to talk." Clara's face shifted from confusion to concern as she followed me into the living room, the space where we had shared countless memories, movie nights, conversations about our future, lazy Sunday mornings. Now, it felt hollow, as if the life we'd built there had vanished along with her honesty. I sat on the edge of the couch, watching as she stood in the doorway, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice a strange mix of caution and defiance. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "I know about the affair, Clara. I know about the hotels, the nights you said you were with friends. I know all of it." Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right response. There was a moment of silence before she finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not what you think." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Is that really the best you can do? After everything, you're going to stand there and deny it?" She took a step toward me, her hands outstretched. "No, wait, just listen. It wasn't serious. I swear. It was just a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. "No, Clara, leaving the stove on is a mistake. This was a choice. And you made it over and over again." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached out, but I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Save it," I said sharply. "I've given you more than enough chances to be honest with me, and you didn't take a single one." She looked away, the tears now streaming down her face. I don't know what to say. Maybe because there's nothing left to say. I stood, grabbing the box of her belongings I'd packed the night before. "Take this and go." Clara looked down at the box, then back at me, her expression a mixture of despair and disbelief. "So that's it? You're just throwing me out? Do you really expect me to do anything else?" I asked, incredulous. "You lied to me, betrayed me, and acted like nothing was wrong. You made your choices. Now, you get to live with them." She took a shaky breath, her hand hovering over the box as if it were a fragile thing. "Please, can we just talk about this? I was stupid, I know that now. But we have so much history. Doesn't that mean anything?" Her words only fueled my anger. History? Clara, our entire history was based on trust, something you clearly don't understand. You threw that away the moment you decided your thrill was more important than our marriage. Clara's voice grew more desperate as she tried to regain control. I'll do anything to make this right. I swear, it'll never happen again. I'll go to therapy, we can go to counseling. Just, please, don't end it like this. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Now she was willing to go to therapy? Now that her secret was out and her safety net was crumbling, she was scrambling to repair the damage. But there was nothing left to fix, and I was done pretending otherwise. Do you remember the last time I asked if you were happy? I asked quietly, watching her face. You looked me in the eye and lied. You said everything was fine, that I was imagining things. But you knew, didn't you? You knew exactly what you were doing. She lowered her head, unable to meet my gaze. I thought I could handle it, that it would just be a phase. I never thought it would get this far. The anger I'd been holding back began to simmer. You never thought it would get this far? I repeated, my voice sharp. You didn't think at all. You didn't think about me, about us. All you cared about was yourself. She flinched, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. But it was quickly replaced by a deeper sense of betrayal. I wanted her to understand just how much damage she'd done, how deeply her betrayal had cut. But I knew that even if she apologized 1,000 times, it wouldn't change a thing. Take the box, Clara, I said, my voice cold. You're not welcome here anymore. Clara took a deep breath, gathering what little dignity she had left. She picked up the box, clutching it tightly, her knuckles white. You know, we're both to blame for this, she said quietly, her voice shaking. It wasn't just me. I felt a rush of anger. Really? You're going to stand there and blame me? For your choices? She looked away, her expression hardening. I was lonely, okay? You were always busy with work, with building your business. You never had time for me. I stared at her, stunned by the audacity of her words. Do you even hear yourself? I was building a life for us, for our future. Every late night, every sacrifice was for us. And while I was doing that, you were throwing it all away. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to argue, but then she just nodded, her face a mask of resignation. Fine. I'll go. But just remember, you weren't perfect either. I took a step back, my hands clenched at my sides. You're right. I wasn't perfect. But I was faithful. And I expected the same from you. Without another word, she turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing through the silence. I stood there, listening as the front door closed, and the weight of her absence settled over me. In the span of a few minutes, my life had been turned upside down. The person I thought I knew, the future I'd planned, it was all gone. I sank onto the couch, the adrenaline fading, leaving only a hollow ache. I had done what I needed to, what was right, but it didn't make the pain any less real. The memories of our life together crowded in, tainted now by the knowledge of her betrayal. I wanted to be angry, to hate her, but all I felt was a deep, unrelenting sadness. After what felt like hours, I finally stood, forcing myself to move, to breathe, to keep going. I walked through the house, my footsteps echoing in the quiet, and I realized that this was the beginning of something new. Painful, yes, but maybe necessary. Clara was gone, and with her, the weight of her lies. As I looked around the empty house, a strange calm settled over me. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt free. The life I'd built with her might have been a lie, but now I had the chance to build something real, something honest. And that, I realized, was worth everything. The days following Clara's departure felt like walking through a fog. The silence in the house was suffocating, punctuated only by the occasional ping of my phone, messages from well-meaning friends who knew something was wrong but didn't press for details. I ignored most of them, not yet ready to explain, not yet ready to dissect my life with curious onlookers. Instead, I threw myself into work, finding solace in the rhythm of emails, meetings, and the endless demands of my business. Work had always been my escape, even before all this, and now it was a lifeline. In those hours, I could pretend everything was normal, that I hadn't just lost the person I thought would be by my side forever. But when I came home each evening to an empty house, the reality set in again, sharp and unyielding. The nights were the hardest, filled with memories that clung to the walls, mocking me. One evening, as I settled into the silence, the doorbell rang. Startled, I made my way to the door, wondering who it could be. Standing there, looking hesitant and more than a little out of place, was Clara. She clutched a folder in her hands, her face pale and drawn. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. I needed to talk to you," she replied, her gaze shifting uncomfortably. A part of me wanted to shut the door, to keep the peace I'd fought so hard to establish, but another part of me, a small, reluctant part, wanted answers. I stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. She walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings as if she barely recognized them. She sat down on the edge of the couch, clutching the folder to her chest. I remained standing, arms crossed, waiting for her to speak. After a few moments of silence, she finally looked up. "I know you probably don't want to see me," she began, her voice trembling, "but I felt like I owed you an explanation." I remained silent, letting her continue. "I messed up, and I know that," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted to explain why, maybe for both our sakes." I wanted to tell her that it didn't matter, that no explanation could justify the lies and betrayal. But the look in her eyes held me back, a rawness that was hard to ignore. So, against my better judgment, I nodded, gesturing for her to go on. She took a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around the folder. "When we got married, I thought I was ready for everything that came with it. The commitment, the sacrifices. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I got so caught up in work, in the routine, that I stopped feeling anything." Her words felt like a knife, twisting slowly. I wanted to shout, to tell her that I'd been there too, that we all felt that way sometimes. But I held back, letting her continue. "I know it sounds selfish, and maybe it is. But I kept searching for something to fill that emptiness, something to make me feel alive again. And I guess I found that with him." She said him like she was trying to protect me from the weight of his name, but it didn't make it hurt any less. "And did it work?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Did he make you feel alive?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "No. It was all a lie. I told myself it was different, that he understood me in ways you didn't. But all I was doing was running away, hiding from the problems I was too afraid to face." For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of her confession settling between us like a thick fog. I felt the urge to forgive her, to tell her that we could work through this. But then I remembered the nights spent wondering where she was, the lies that had become our new normal, and the urge faded, replaced by a cold resolve. "So why now?" I asked finally. "Why come back here and tell me all this?" She looked down at the folder, her fingers tracing its edge. "Because I wanted to be honest, at least once." "And because?" "I wanted to see if there was any chance." "There isn't," I interrupted, my voice firm. "Clara, I appreciate that you came here, that you wanted to explain. But whatever we had, it's gone. You made sure of that." Her face fell, and she nodded slowly, the reality settling in. She handed me the folder, her hand trembling slightly. "These are some papers, financial stuff I thought you might need. I also wanted to ask about a few things of mine I left behind, but I guess that can wait." I took the folder, glancing at it briefly before setting it aside. "Is that all?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperation I hadn't seen before. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm sorry. For everything." The words hung in the air, heavy and hollow. I wanted to believe her, to find some solace in her apology. But it felt empty, like trying to fill a void that could never be whole again. I nodded curtly, saying nothing, and she took that as her cue to leave. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange sense of finality, a quiet acceptance that this chapter of my life was truly over. I didn't feel relief or closure, just a dull ache that settled deep in my chest. The person I'd loved, the future I'd envisioned, it was all gone, replaced by a new reality that I was only beginning to understand. I sat down, the silence swallowing me, and opened the folder she'd left behind. Inside were bank statements, insurance papers, things we'd once shared. Each page felt like a relic of a life that no longer existed, a reminder of what had been lost. In the days that followed, I did my best to move on, to fill the emptiness with new routines, new goals. Friends reached out, offering support, but I kept my distance, needing time to process everything alone. It was harder than I expected. Memories lingered, surfacing at the most unexpected times, the scent of her perfume still faintly clinging to the couch cushions, the way her laughter used to fill the space with warmth. But each day, I grew a little stronger, a little more certain that I was doing the right thing. One evening, as I was organizing some old files in the study, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it, expecting a spam message, but froze when I saw the words. "Hey. I just wanted to say I hope you're doing okay." The number wasn't familiar, but I recognized the tone. It was her. Clara. She'd clearly gotten a new number, probably after losing access to our shared account. I stared at the message, my mind racing, torn between the urge to reply and the need to move on. I let out a long breath, setting the phone down. There was nothing left to say. I'd spent enough time chasing a ghost, trying to make sense of the senseless. And now, it was time to let go, to close this chapter and begin a new one, no matter how uncertain it felt. That night, for the first time since she'd left, I slept soundly. It was a small victory, but one I clung to, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. I didn't know what the future held, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. Months passed, and slowly, life settled into a new normal. I had thrown myself into work and gradually found comfort in routines that didn't include Clara. I wasn't happy, not entirely, but I was managing. The house felt emptier, but I told myself that emptiness was better than lies. People had stopped asking about her, and I was grateful to be moving forward quietly, rebuilding my life one day at a time. One evening, just as I was closing up the office, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, it was an unfamiliar number. I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but something urged me to answer. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end, and then a man's voice, soft and hesitant. "Is this James?" "Yes, who's this?" "This is Dr. Kendall." I was asked to call you by Clara." The name hit me like a cold wind, and my heart skipped. "Clara?" I repeated, the word foreign and strange after so much time. "Yes. She's been under my care recently, and she mentioned that you're her emergency contact. I know this might come as a shock, but I thought you should know. Clara is in the hospital." My mind spun. I hadn't spoken to Clara since she'd come by months ago, hadn't even seen her, aside from the occasional glimpse of her in passing around town. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was a sigh on the other end. "She was brought in after collapsing at work. We've been treating her for advanced liver failure. I'm afraid her prognosis isn't good." The words barely registered. Liver failure? But Clara was healthy, she was always. I trailed off, my mind struggling to reconcile this news with the woman I'd once known. "Yes, but she's been dealing with an undiagnosed condition for some time, which has now progressed very quickly. I know you're separated, but Clara was very insistent that we reach out to you." I sat there, stunned, the weight of the news pressing down on me like a tidal wave. After a moment, I forced myself to ask, Can I see her?" "Of course. I think that would mean a lot to her. She's in room 312 at St. Mary's." The drive to the hospital was a blur, my mind racing with questions and memories, all tangled in a web of confusion and grief. I tried to prepare myself for what I might see, but nothing could have prepared me for the frail figure lying in that hospital bed, a shadow of the woman I once loved. Clara's skin was pale, almost translucent, and her once bright eyes were dim, surrounded by dark circles. When she saw me, her lips curved into a weak smile, and she tried to sit up, but her strength failed her. "James," she whispered, her voice so soft I had to lean in to hear. I pulled up a chair beside her, unsure of what to say, feeling a mixture of sadness and anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. She let out a small, breathy laugh. "Would you have believed me if I had? After everything, after all the mistakes I made?" I swallowed hard, unable to answer. She was right. I'd spent so much time trying to move past the hurt, to convince myself that her betrayal was the end of our story, that I'd built walls too high for any truth to penetrate. But sitting here now, none of that mattered. We sat in silence for a while, the sound of the machines around her a constant reminder of time slipping away. Finally, she spoke again, her words slow and deliberate. "James, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I don't deserve your kindness, not after what I did. But there's something I need you to know." She reached out, her hand trembling, and I took it, feeling the coolness of her skin against mine. "What is it?" I whispered, barely able to find my voice. Her eyes filled with tears, and she took a deep, shuddering breath. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, but I am. I didn't realize how much I would regret it until it was too late. And now there's no time left to make it right." I tightened my grip on her hand, trying to offer some small comfort, even though my heart ached with all the words left unsaid, all the anger I'd held onto for so long. "You don't have to apologize, Clara. Just rest." But she shook her head. "I need you to hear this. I need you to know. I never stopped loving you. Even when I was selfish, even when I made the worst mistakes. You were always the best thing in my life." Tears blurred my vision, and I looked away, unable to bear the pain in her eyes. She'd broken my heart once, and here she was, doing it all over again, in the cruelest way possible. But there was no room left for anger, only an overwhelming sadness that seemed to swallow me whole. We sat there, hands clasped, as the minutes ticked by. I told her stories from our past, the good memories, the ones that still made me smile. She laughed softly, and for a moment, it felt like we were back in our old life, a life that had ended far too soon. As the night wore on, Clara's breathing grew shallow, her grip on my hand weakening. Her eyes fluttered closed, and I knew the end was near. I wanted to hold on to her, to keep her here a little longer, but I knew that this was her time to go. "Goodbye, Clara," I whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'll never forget you." Her lips curved into a faint smile, and with one final breath, she slipped away, leaving me alone in the sterile quiet of the hospital room. I stayed there, her hand still in mine, until the nurses came in and gently guided me away. Walking out of the hospital felt like leaving a part of myself behind, a piece of my heart that I would never get back. Clara was gone, and with her, all the pain and all the love we'd shared. I had come here to say goodbye, but I hadn't realized that it would cost me so much. In the weeks that followed, I tried to find comfort in the memories, the good times, the laughter, but a hollow ache lingered. People told me I'd done the right thing, that I'd been there for her in her final moments. But the truth was, it didn't feel like enough. I had loved her, forgiven her in those last hours, but I knew that a part of me would always be haunted by what could have been. And so, I went on, carrying the weight of her memory, a bittersweet reminder of a love that had once been whole, a love that had ended far too soon.